everybody. I hope you enjoyed our last session. Like I said, I love music and marketing, so it's a really special one for me. And speaking of special sessions, I am so excited about this session. So for those that have not been around for all 5 years, fun fact, Cherie Hu was our first keynote speaker in 2021 when we launched this thing very, very deep in COVID. And so I figured for our 5-year anniversary, it'd be a really, really good time to bring her back to talk about how much has changed since February 2021 and how much has stayed the same, basically. So I am really excited to bring her back, and interviewing her is a good friend, Tatiana, who has also been a speaker in the past. So it's the whole time is a blast from the past. I'm really excited about it. Hey, Tati.
Christine, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining. It's good to see you. Let's bring up Cherie as well. Hello.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
How's it going, Cherie?
It's good. Good. Happy Saturday. Happy weekend.
Saturday, everyone. I hope it's been going well so far. Everyone participating in Measure of Music. Excited to be back here. And, interviewing you about the past 5 years where so much has changed, so much has stayed the same. It's a very interesting time to be kind of reflecting. I love this title. What is it? Revisiting
the future. Yes.
I thought it would be good to start by just kind of updating everyone on what you've been up to over the past 5 years. I know that's a long time to think about, but are there any kind of highlights that stand out to you about what you've been doing or what Water and Music has been doing?
Yeah, so I've been running Water Music full-time for the last 5 years. It's my own music tech research and consulting firm. I would say the main change that we have made in the last few years is really focusing on, now that we have 5 years worth of history and of data on how the music tech landscape has evolved, starting to do more kind of longitudinal historical reports on the landscape. So for example, now we have 5 years worth of data on music tech startup activity and investment. So we'll dive a lot into that today in this conversation. But one of our latest reports kind of diving into just how much has changed and evolved since 2020 when we first started tracking this at the start of COVID. We are back on the subscription membership side to just regular education for our community, especially on areas like AI that are moving super quickly. So doing monthly webinars for our subscribers on a variety of different topics in AI and music tech at large. And I'm also growing the consulting side of Water Music as well. So doing more strategic advisory for music tech companies, everyone from startups to bigger traditional music companies as well.
Awesome. Great timing to be having this conversation.
Yes.
And yeah, I've been a reader of Water and Music for at least 5 years. Oh my God, I don't even know. But I thought it would be fun to kind of dig into the archives and see what you guys were writing about in 2021 at the last time that you did this keynote. So I'm going to read a couple of headlines to you and everyone here. We've got what will happen to all of these live streaming platforms. The creator economy is growing much faster than music streaming. The rise of the fan-centric music streaming service. Music streaming services are losing their brand identity. Here's the visual evidence. That was a great one. Virtual reality and immersive concerts, an introductory primer. The root of the music NFT problem. And 3 parallel futures for social audio. So yeah, so much there that we're still talking about that I think shows just kind of how ahead of the curve Water and Music has always been. And also some things that have sort of faded away. So what are your kind of initial reactions to hearing that list?
Yeah, such a different time. I think, I guess the impact that COVID had that lasted for quite a long time was the whole music industry being forced and thrown into this pure experimental phase of how do we, I guess, first realizing that the music industry going 100% digital, there were a lot of issues with the digital economy around music. How do we actually make this sustainable and healthy for everyone involved, from artists to fans to the people working with artists? And so there's just a lot of throwing everything at the wall. So I think I must have tracked at least like 30 or 40 different like live streaming offerings that were like trying to cater to artists, or that artists were just like hosting these shows and experiences on. And some were very kind of glitchy and scrappy. Others were very like premium and produced. And so I think that article, what will happen to all these music live streaming platforms, is just like, I guess, recognizing that it was so crowded, and especially as there were signals that in-person shows were like slowly going to come back, how exactly that market would shift, or what role like a live streaming platform would play in a world where live shows fully came back to normal.
Yeah.
At the time, like, yeah, in the lens of experimentation, there was so much more interest in areas like virtual reality and NFTs than I had seen in my whole career, like since starting to cover music tech around a decade ago. And I think that was a net positive, that people were actually leaning into experimenting with the tech, because that was really the main thing in front of them, as opposed to only talking in terms of hypotheticals or speculation. It's like, no, let's try to put on something and share our learnings, our experiences with our peers and with other people in the industry. So it was, period of a lot of hype, but as part of that, a lot of tangible experimentation and case studies that I think even today, several years later, we can still learn from and incorporate into any tech experiment.
Yeah, no, that's a really good way to put it. And I think that like the music industry sometimes gets a lot of flack for like jumping on to different hype cycles and trying all these different things, but it's also not a bad thing to a certain extent to be experimenting. And there was a time when I think the industry wasn't doing really that at all. So I guess we've like swung maybe too far in one direction, but it's nice to see the experimentation. You also touched on something I wanted to ask you about, which is how much like startup investment has changed. In 2021, Water and Music noted like the top 3 categories of startup investment, and they were live streaming, fan community engagement platforms, and music creation / production tools. Whereas now they're rights management, live operations tech, and AI production and rights infrastructure, which like could not be more different, or as you've put it, less glamorous than the things that were being, getting so much attention in 2021. So why do you think that shift has happened?
I think there are a few different reasons. One is definitely just the disruptive impact of the pandemic, making fans, people in the industry, and then also investors interested in these like bigger kind of moonshot bets, like, like the industry could change and look fundamentally different. What might that look like? So that kind of going into live streaming. I was going to mention this with one of the headlines that you cited, like this new focus on direct to fan engagement and fan communities, as opposed to just streaming or social media on like a more surface level. So just at the time, people just being more interested in ways of truly rethinking how the industry was going to work. 5 years, like fast forward 5 years later now, the industry, I don't want to use the term, I guess, back to normal at face value, but like live shows have definitely like come back at a much higher pace. I think the industry is kind of, the day-to-day looks similar to kind of pre-COVID. And as a result, I think a lot of, there's, I guess, less demand for kind of shiny, glamorous new tech that won't solve actual fundamental industry problems that I feel like going back to regular industry day-to-day people are realizing is there. For example, I think it's interesting that like ticketing emerged in the last year as an area of music and tech that's gotten the most like regulatory and also industry scrutiny in terms of how that part of live like is, I guess, arguably like not as favorable to artists, or there's a lot of practice around lack of data sharing. So a lot of the live companies that got funded last year are specifically tackling like ticketing, fan engagement, fan data around live events. And then also, I guess the final general reason why I think this has shifted is because of like wider macroeconomic conditions. I think a lot of the startups in general that were funded in early COVID were like zero interest rate phenomena, to put it like very lovingly. Cash was very cheap. A lot of it was flowing around. And I think at least last year, it looked very different. And I think at large, investors were looking not so much for moonshot visionary ideas as much for like proven business models and people who can prove that this is actually a product that works and that people will want to use. And so for music, I think that applies to, or that connects to investing in the core revenue streams, which I think have a lot of room for improvement, like managing and tracking rights and then managing the live music side as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you think that this is fundamentally a good thing, this shift? Because I do think that like there's been a tendency in the music industry to focus on like almost like the fun problems to solve, the like sexy, new, exciting, brand new thing, rather than trying to attack the really long-standing, more boring issues that have been here for so long. Like, so yeah, do you think that this is a good thing maybe?
Definitely. And I think both approaches can work in parallel, like people working on fun experimental stuff while others are tackling kind of more core endemic issues. But to ground it in like an emerging tech example, I feel like with every new emerging tech trend that comes up in music, so there are like three that are top of mind: generative AI right now, NFTs and Web3 kind of in the 2020s, and then also virtual reality and like metaverse gaming concerts. Rights very often becomes the main bottleneck to doing like really large scale, really cool, ambitious projects, especially around like revenue sharing, kind of a more collective approach to making the best use of this tech. I think rights is at the center of the existential like AI debates that are happening in the industry right now. Like, is there even a world where like a copyright framework meshes well with the way that like these large AI models work? I think that's still up for debate. With the NFT boom, there are a lot of startups trying to put rights management on the blockchain and immediately like ran into a lot of obstacles there just because of how complicated rights management is. And I think with AI and Web3 especially, those are both to an extent garbage in, garbage out systems. So like if you put bad rights data on the blockchain, that's not, or to put it another way, blockchain is not going to solve the issue of inaccurate rights data that is already all over the industry. That's like a much, much deeper technical, political, kind of cultural issue. So I think, yeah, it's very important for those two paths to run and hopefully like learn from each other in parallel.
Yeah, it feels like we're kind of realizing that we need both, but sometimes we can't do the fun, exciting stuff if we haven't solved the like the underlying foundational stuff. So I think that's a really good way to put it. I also wanted to ask you about your meticulously updated music tech ouroboros, which if anybody watching this has seen it, it has surely sent a chill down your spine. So tell us a little bit about what that is for anyone who's not familiar and why it's so important.
Yes, thank you. So in summary, the music tech ownership ouroboros is a map that I just built for my own reference initially of all of the different investment and ownership stakes that everyone from major labels to big tech conglomerates like Tencent to private equity finance firms like Blackstone were taking in music tech companies. I made this for myself just because there, especially in the last 5 years, there's more and more investment capital going into music tech, but no resource that like had connected the dots on like a visual spatial level, and especially that kind of showed the degrees of separation between like various companies and how it's actually a very tight knit community. I don't know if community is the right word. A tight knit ecosystem in terms of like who's backing these companies. Mm-hmm. So if you go on the Water Music website, and I think a link was shared in the comments as well, you'll see it's just a sprawling map of investment and ownership stakes. I think the reason why it's resonated so much with people in the industry is one, just to be aware that these relationships exist. I think, and especially thinking about business decisions that companies might make, something that isn't always considered is like who owns those companies and what they're expecting in terms of growth, in terms of like, are they expecting to sell this company in the next 5 to 10 years, which is what a lot of like private equity firms might do. So just making people aware of that web of ownership. And I think, especially now, there's a lot of good debate about the impact of consolidation. So as more music tech, music rights companies get bought up by the same small handful of firms, what room is there for like more independent companies to come in and like not just serve like larger artists, for example, but serve kind of the longer tail of independent artists, and just generally to what extent is the market fair for new people who want to come in. So it's kind of, I guess those are the two levels, like one, just awareness and shared understanding of like all the different players in music tech, and then thinking strategically about what that might mean in terms of like prospects for building a company in a certain area.
Yeah, no, it's so important to have like the lay of the land before we have these conversations about like, why are these things happening? What is the impact of consolidation? Like you kind of have to know what you're dealing with. And I feel like before you had started publishing this, I don't think I'd ever seen anybody do such a thorough job of it and like make it so clear. So I think it's awesome. I'm curious if any like patterns have sort of emerged as you've been updating it over the years. Like what direction are things moving or moving away from?
Yes. Two patterns stand out to me from like recent deals. One is there is a lot of private equity interest in creative tools for music, and also in companies that are like servicing the independent community with both like rights and technology to manage those rights. So Francisco Partners is an example of a company. They were behind the Native Instruments and Isotope merger into one single company, and they have equity stakes in a lot of other like tools for artists and kind of services catering to the long tail of artists. FlexPoint Forward is another private equity firm that has bought stakes in Duetti, which is buying out independent artist catalogs, and Create Music Group, which is much bigger company that is like both buying up label and publishing rights, but they also have their own in-house like marketing and rights management tech. So that's one area, like private equity seeing a lot of opportunity in this kind of long tail artist tool space. And then second trend, if you look at the shape of the ouroboros and kind of which company has the most connections, Tencent. It's like Tencent and Universal are like right at the center. I think because they actually have, Tencent has equity in Universal, and I think in a few other bigger labels. And because Tencent is one of the, if not the biggest tech conglomerate in China and also in the world, I think they're definitely investing directly in some of the biggest not just music rights companies, but also gaming companies, film, TV companies. So they're really trying to build like a whole entertainment portfolio that is truly global. I think it'll be interesting to see the influence like long-term of like Chinese money backing a lot of these really big, some US centric, some like Europe centric companies as well. So I guess like ongoing internationalization and globalization of how that money is flowing.
Oh, awesome. There it is.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you.
Wow. It's crazy how big it's gotten. I feel like I remember when you did this out like 4 or 5 years ago, and it was like a quarter of the size. It's nuts.
And there are actually some new deals I have to add next week that people have been sharing with me, this is also the great thing about having this out there is getting feedback from people on deals that like, I don't know how I missed, but they're like, oh, did you know that this like really big PRO, this really big rights management firm was actually bought up by private equity like 5-10 years ago. So it's really nice to try to get as close to completion as possible.
Awesome. No, it's such a good resource. It's so, anybody watching who hasn't checked it out, definitely do. Speaking of resources, you had a really great webinar a couple weeks ago on a totally separate topic, which was fandom. And I believe it was called the superfan fallacy, or at least that was one of the things on your website. So let's talk about it. Fandom is something that, for a couple of years now, the music industry has been really gung-ho about monetizing. You have been one to recognize how there's a lot of intricacies and nuances that are being glossed over there. So I guess why did you call it the superfan fallacy? What does that mean?
Yes, and I guess to preface, superfan fallacy does not mean that that superfans are not important or that fans are not important. I think starting with that understanding that fans are so core to making the industry run as much as the artists themselves. So I guess starting from there, it does not mean that fans are not important. I think the fallacy that I and many other people in the industry saw was around, underestimating the challenges or the potentially negative second order effects of just going full speed ahead with certain models around fandom. So to kind of summarize what we talked about in the webinar, there are many different angles through which you can look at this. There is a really good writer, Monia Ali, who talked more about the emotional side. So for example, if you take the superfan model to its extreme from a financial standpoint, you're having people like these superfans pay more money to feel a stronger emotional connection to the artist, or not even to the artist, to an idea around the artist in a more abstract way. And that can lead to a relationship that is very unhealthy. I think that leads to the perception of all these toxic standoms that are all over the internet. So it's that as an example, kind of what are we really optimizing for there? And then there's a legal fallacy, which Andy Blair, who's an attorney, presented on in terms of what ownership of fan data actually means. So I guess one who can legally own or control fan data, and how that often is so fragmented across so many different players in the industry. I think an artist like James Blake speaking out about this is a really good example, because he is a huge major label artist, wanted to do more things with his fans, but then realized that he had very little control over that with all the deals that he was part of. And so that's why he launched his Vault subscription and is kind of trying to do a lot more direct to fan stuff, but just understanding that that the challenge there. And then Hannah Collard from Media Research joined the webinar, gave a very good presentation on Media's engagement data from the tech perspective on fan platforms. And so from that side, if you're trying to start a new superfan startup, which I feel like there's so many new ventures popping up in that world every year. The idea of success will look very different from a social media platform traditionally, because you're not necessarily aiming for mass casual engagement, but also keeping fans on a platform is so difficult. Keeping people engaged with a new app that they add to their phone is already super challenging. But especially for fandom, I think Media's metrics were weekly active usage was only around 10% for these like more niche fan platforms versus closer to 50-60% for like a Facebook or Instagram. So just through many angles, the legal side, the emotional side, technical side, it's not, I guess there are many more challenges than people might like make it out to be.
Yeah. And that's a perfect segue, because I wanted to ask you about running your own community and in some ways fan base with Water and Music. Like, you've had experience with trying to keep people engaged, keep them maybe not on a platform, but on a site, on a Discord channel. What have you learned about like how to keep a curious and engaged audience and subscriber membership?
Yeah, I would say, especially in terms of insights that could maybe translate to like an artist community or also a music industry community, it is so important in terms of keeping a community engaged to have people in the community who are constantly leading by example on what good engagement in the community looks like. I guess actually to take that, to zoom out a little bit more on that statement, a community by default, like that's healthy, I think is not going to be for everyone. I think it's like very healthy communities are very clear about who they are for and who they're not for, the kinds of interactions that are welcome and encouraged, and then of course discouraged. The enforcement side is really important too. From like a community member standpoint, I've been in a lot of other communities where I go in and it just feels very like unstructured in a way that would actually turn me off from engaging more, because there isn't a lot of like guidance, or there aren't a lot of like examples that I'm seeing of what good interaction looks like, or just like guidelines there. So yeah, in terms of like my advice based on what I've learned and experienced for anyone looking to build a community is like, don't be afraid to be really specific about like what good community and healthy community engagement looks like, and who you are for and not for. Because I think people will appreciate that in a world where there are so many communities and groups that you can join. I think like focus and specificity is always really good.
Yeah, that's an incredible point. And it's so interesting because of how it sort of clashes, I think, with a lot of what the music business for most of its existence has focused on, which is like making something that will resonate with the widest number of people and sort of try and create these mass market successes. But if you really do want to invest in fandom and community building, it's actually about maybe being okay with having a smaller but more engaged and clearer community, and how if you try to scale that too quickly, it actually may destroy it. So I think that's a really important takeaway.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to mention that we've like mentioned fandom a lot of different times throughout this conversation, and I think one of the things that has stayed the same since the beginning of COVID is this focus on, or I guess this mindset shift of what if we just focus on the smaller group of fans or customers who like really matter, versus just getting to mass scale. I think that has had like a local maximum culmination in like Universal Music Group's capital markets report from last year, where they said direct to fan was the fastest growing part of their business, and they're going to invest in a lot of in-house like infrastructure and data analytics just for super fans versus just for like superstar artists or their catalogs. I think that is, and I think we're actually still early in seeing like what that will look like. So it'll be really interesting to track that.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I have a million more questions for you. I think I have time for maybe like 2 more before turning you over.
Okay.
Let's talk about some advice from your perspective. What are a couple of key moves that artists and executives can be doing right now to stay ahead?
I very strongly believe that the best way to build a critical perspective on tech is to engage with it more. I've noticed, especially with an area like AI, I've met like whole groups of people in the industry who have a lot of super valid and well thought out concerns about the impact of generative AI. But then when I ask who in the room has actually tried Suno or like tried any AI app, very few people raise their hands. And I understand some people might not want to engage with it from like an ethical, moral standpoint, but especially if you are on the creative or right side of the industry, having a direct understanding from your own experience of like what these tools can and cannot do, how they are still very limited creatively, I think can have a really positive impact on just how you are thinking critically about the space at large. Mm-hmm. We saw this with like the NFT Web3 side, like a lot of our reports and things that we were able to speak more eloquently and critically on came from us like trying to launch our own NFTs or working with people who were launching their own projects and documenting at every step of the way, like what did and didn't work. So I would, my main advice for people looking to stay ahead is, even more than just like following the news of what might be happening, also getting scrappy with the tools themselves and building your own opinion of like, what they can and can't do.
Yeah, that's great advice. Awesome. And seeing as this is a data conference, I wanted to ask you, what would you say is the current state of data in music? I know you touched a little bit on this with the lack of ownership. Are there any other big trends you've noticed and just kind of what is the state of things?
Yeah, for this, I'll pull from the survey that we ran. Last year, we did a state of data in the music industry survey that was industry facing. We surveyed several hundred people in the industry just to get their take on how they felt with their own data literacy and what tools they were using. I would say the number one kind of contradiction or maybe like oxymoron that we saw was, I guess, unsurprisingly, data budgets continue to be on the rise. So I think people in the industry largely agree that data matters more than ever to do good business. But then when we ask people to say, like, do you understand the return on your investment in that data? Almost half of people said they had no idea. Or like, we're not tracking this, or we're actually not able to quantify that. I think that speaks to so many challenges with working with music data. Yeah. One, because like music as an art form and also how it's experienced as like in terms of culture is so spread out, so fragmented. It's really hard when you're like building out a marketing campaign, for example, to isolate like the impact of one specific thing that you do, one specific activation, because usually like the success of a campaign is a combination of a lot of, proactive human effort, but also so many other things outside of like the teams or artist control that are leading to a song or an album really blowing up. So that's one. And then to tie it also back to fan data, so even though there are some, I think, fallacies in how people are talking about it, it is still such an important area of the industry and a really big opportunity, especially in terms of how that data is managed. So in our survey, like the number one tool for people to manage fan data was just a custom spreadsheet. So there's a lot of work happening. I think so much of the industry runs on Excel. It is amazing that things still work,
Crazy. I hope everyone's backing up their drives. Crazy.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously Excel is good for some custom things, but especially once you get to a certain scale, I think it would be so much nicer to have a lot more like streamlined and connected tools for managing fandom, especially given the number of places where an artist and their brand and their community might be active. So that from the survey, and I think still carries over to today, was like a huge gap and opportunity that we saw.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I feel like you tweeted something funny about this the other day. It was like Severance related.
Oh yeah. For anyone who watches Severance, I think so much of music and data analytics is just macro data refinement. Like people looking at a grid of numbers and being like, this is the vibe right here. Yeah. All right, let's double click on that. Yes.
We got to get out of Lumon, people. Yeah. On that note, thank you so much, Cherie, for doing this. You are an incredible thought leader, educator, analyst, and everyone here should be following your work and following modern music. And yeah, thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you. Also, everyone follow Tatiana and Midia also.
Thank you.
Hi guys, that was so fun. Cherie, we have 1 minute, so I'm going to ask one question. Okay. Why the name Water and Music?
Great question. It came up very randomly from a Quincy Jones interview. So he and Kendrick Lamar did like a 5-minute interview on Hypebeast or a similar channel in 2016. And at the end, Quincy says the last 2 things to leave the planet will be water and music. And I was like in my dorm room in college. It was like 2 a.m. and I like needed a name for my newsletter, and I watched that, and I was like, yes, that's it. So.
What a wonderful way to end this. That was great. Thank you so much, Cherie. Thank you, Tatiana. That was wonderful. I think everyone really enjoyed this as well. I'm sure you guys understand why I decided to bring Cherie back. So thank you for saying yes. And with that, I'm moderating the next keynote, guys. So we're going to go talk about all these wonderful music companies that exist. Thank you, Tati. Thank you, Cherie. Have a good night, guys.
Yep, thank you.
Have a lovely weekend. Bye.